Hi, Rachel, and welcome to the Natural Birth Podcast. How are you going today?
I'm good. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, such a pleasure having you on this podcast. I can't wait to take part of your enormous wisdom that you hold about all things birth. And we're going to dive into birth as a rite of passage today. But before we do that, we're actually also going to hear about your two birth stories, the birth experiences that you've had. And I know your first one was a medicalized one, and your second was a natural one with exclamation marks. So let's dive into that and just share with us a little bit about, birthing for you and how that informed you and maybe informed you to become a midwife, maybe. I don't know.
Okay, so this is interesting because I never used to talk about my birth experiences when I was a practicing midwife on purpose because I didn't want, I did after, if women weren't my clients, but if they were my clients, I wouldn't kind of talk about my own birth because I didn't want to influence their decision making or, influence them in any way. But now I kind of almost feel I'm freer to do it because I'm not practicing as a midwife anymore. So, but it's still kind of, I don't know, they're quite private. Your birth experiences are quite private, aren't they? But anyway, I shall share with you.
Thank you.
So my first baby I had him when I was 18. So still in that real, you kind of look at rites of passage, I was still in that real maiden phase, that real rebellious maiden phase of not quite knowing who you are at that age, you don't know who you are. And I kind of approached it very much how I'd approached my menarche. So, when you look at rites of passage, you often notice a pattern in how you approach things, which is your creative pattern, which is, for me, it's to learn intellectually about things. So, there wasn't really this big spiritual connection. There was just I need to learn how my body works. This is really interesting. How does it all work? How am I going to do this? I was going to be in control of all of this. And I think I actually read Miriam Stoppard's book, which was horrendous. But anyway, at the time it was really interesting, the pictures of the baby growing. So I kind of approached my birth very much from the perspective of, I can do this. My mother had given birth. It wasn't a big deal. Just like my menarche wasn't a big deal. This is just something the body does. Very matter of fact. And of course I can give birth. Like, why wouldn't I be able to? And I'm just going to learn about how my body works. And I'm just going to go in to the hospital and give birth because I didn't know there's any other options than hospital.
Yeah.
Because even though this was in the UK where home birth is free on the NHS, it's not necessarily offered. You don't necessarily know about it unless you've got a midwife or a GP who offers it to you or you know about it. So I headed off into hospital with my then 18-year-old partner, who I'm actually still with, my husband now.
Oh, wow, really? What a story. That's amazing. Brilliant. I love that nowadays.
I know. We're very different people, but we still kind of fit together.
Wow.
And so, here's me, an 18-year-old young woman, with my 18-year-old partner, who, men at that age are even less... Bless him.
Yeah.
Men in the birth space to begin with is kind of a really interesting concept, but anyway. So in we went and just had the kind of standard hospital kind of birth at that time. From, there's me going in thinking, well, you just go into labor and you have a baby and I'm just going to do it naturally. I don't really want pain relief because of course I can do this. And I wasn't really in, quote, established labor, so I got sent home a couple of times. By the time I was deemed to be in established labor, I'd already been given opiates because, I wasn't in established labor, so I just need these opiates to relax. And I was put into the, it was called the early, this is 30 years ago. So in the UK, it was the early labour room. It was basically a ward that you were put on when you weren't in proper labour and you weren't allowed to be in a birth room yet.
Right. What did that look like? Was that just
Well,
like a waiting room?
Yeah, well, it had actually 4 beds in it. So there was women coming in and then going out because then they were in labour. So there's me kind of.
So you were in early labor with other women in kind of a ward situation.
Yeah.
How strange.
There was a beanbag in there because I was sitting on the beanbag, so I was like completely out of it, and like because I'd had opiates, I had diamorphine, which is essentially heroin, so I was kind of feeling great, but all just a bit kind of what's going on.
Yeah.
And then it must have been a designated assessment time, because you also didn't get designated, a midwife one-on-one because you weren't in labour, so you didn't need one. And it's interesting because in my mind, this was a midwife, but I've actually got my notes, and it wasn't a midwife, it was an obstetrician who came in and did a vaginal examination. And at the same time as doing the vaginal examination said, and I'll just pop your waters, pop.
Oh
My
gosh.
waters. And
No discussion, no risks and
no,
benefits. Here you were like up, on opioids, and oh, here comes the
yeah,
water. And yeah.
yeah, it was
As
oh,
you do.
okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, broke my waters and said that I was 7 centimeters and I'd be having a baby soon.
Oh.
And then wandered off.
Huh.
So I'm going, okay, well, that's good news, I guess. I'm going to have a baby soon. But with the waters being broken, then it just got full. I just was obviously transitional, because then I just kind of lost my ability to manage the pain. Just was, still in this early labor room, was completely losing the plot. Just typical transition. Freaking out, and just
Absolutely.
knew I couldn't do this for some reason. I thought it was going to be a long time, and I couldn't do it any longer without an epidural. So I wondered, I'd asked for it. I'd asked for an epidural, and I was told it was too late, and that they must have been getting a room ready for me to go into the official birth room or something, and then was left alone again. And so I wandered along the corridor to the staff room and knocked on the door, and somebody opened the door, and they all stand there with mugs. I can remember them all with mugs of tea and coffee, and had a contraction, so I had to stop and kind of hold onto the door frame while they all watched me. And then when the contraction had gone, I just said, I need an epidural now. And I got one. So I had an epidural, and of course then everything just completely slowed down and stopped, and it was another 6 hours.
Oh gosh.
But I slept because I'd been awake for two nights then. So I slept, and then it came to pushing this baby out. And I actually use my CTG trace as a teaching tool now, because it's actually really interesting, because it just is a classic CTG trace of a baby who is actually a healthy full-term baby, being given too much syntocinon, as in with too many contractions, because they then put up syntocinon because obviously everything's slowed down. So I've got syntocinon and epidural, and then they got me up and pushing, and I was having like 6 or 7 contractions in 10 minutes. So you're meant to have 3, because you need that resting phase. The uterus needs to rest in order to reperfuse the placenta with oxygen to get to the baby. So you can kind of see this CTG trace of like contraction after contraction after contraction. And then the contractions actually never were at the point where you would put syntocinon up. They were always 4 to 5 and 10 without syntocinon. But anyway, put syntocinon up, and then you could just see this huge overcontraction happening. And you could see the baby's heart rate responding to it. It was fascinating. It was responding with early decelerations, which is a healthy response to contraction. And then it was just getting more and more difficult for that heart rate to recover. And then, then the baby was obviously getting hypoxic, and then it started to get a higher heartbeat. So by the time the baby was born, we had a very high heartbeat and overcontraction. And that's probably why they said, oh, we're going to do an instrumental birth, and started setting up for that.
Because we need to get the baby out, because the baby's getting distressed, because we're putting up this synthetic drip that's causing you to have. I can't believe that they didn't stop the syntocinon when they saw that you're having way too many contractions, first of all. And I mean, all mamas listening to this now, this is, we're 2 midwives chatting, just so you guys know that, this is actually something that is important to know, because this is normal practice. If you do get an epidural during labor, it might slow your labor down, and you might need this syntocinon drip. And there are risks with this, both obviously the epidural and with the syntocinon. Did anyone talk to you about these risks before they gave you the epidural and the syntocinon?
No, probably because I was demanding the epidural by the time I got it. And I'm sure that they did do that. The anaesthetist stands there and runs through the risks, and by that point you don't care because you just want the epidural. So I didn't really listen to any of those risks. And certainly I didn't even know I had syntocinon until I got my CTG, and then I hadn't connected. Maybe they did, but it certainly wasn't something I remember. And now, looking at that trace, when I show student midwives that trace, the first thing they say is turn the syntocinon off. I don't tell them what happens at the end. I just say, at this point, what would you do? And they all say, oh my God, turn the syntocinon off. So, hopefully practice. That was 30 years ago. So of course the baby's now showing signs of distress. And so they're setting up for an instrumental. And I can just remember this doctor doing vaginal exam. And I had an epidural, bear in mind. So I couldn't, I could feel stuff, but it certainly wasn't painful. But it was so uncomfortable, this vaginal examination by this obstetrician, who was obviously digging about to find out exactly where the baby was, because he thought he was going to then pull it out. And I just thought, this is not happening. I am getting this baby out before this man comes anywhere near me with those instruments. So he said 15 minutes. He went off. They were all setting up. And I asked for the squatting cushion. When I'd done a hospital tour, they'd showed me this squatting cushion, which is like, I think they've been banned now, I don't know why. It was like a soft cushion that you could sit on the bed with handles that you could pull up on.
Brilliant.
I asked for that, and they obviously dusted it off out of a cupboard somewhere because they were a bit annoyed. And I just went for it, and full on. They were directing pushing anyway, which you could see, which is then again stresses the baby out even more. So I'm now adding to it, really, really well pushing, because I'm determined to get this baby out. So we're all just stressing this baby out, trying to get him out.
Oh, goodness.
And he came out before they put I don't know whether they were going to do ventus or forceps. I have no idea. They didn't get that far. And he came out, and I'd asked for, it was in my birth plan, I'd asked for skin to skin at birth. Now, 30 years ago, that was not the norm. So they all thought I was a weird hippie because I'd asked for that. But they did it. They put this baby who, he passed meconium on his way out. So I was covered in, like, all of my belly was just covered in poo. He was covered in poo, but they did put him on me. And, there he was, skin to skin. So I got what I wanted. And he was kind of, now, you see, it's interesting because at the time I had no midwifery knowledge. What I now know is that he had respiratory distress because of what had happened.
Naturally.
So they whipped him off, resuscitated him, and then put him back on me, but he was still kind of grunting. And when I asked about it, they said, oh, it's because he's mucousy. So in my head, I'd stuck he's mucousy, when it wasn't. It was because he was still respiratory, he was still experiencing distress because of the birth he'd had. So after a pretty short while, they put him in said we need to take him to nursery to observe because he's mucousy. Not saying because we've stressed him out so much he's kind of grunting. He's having a bit of, he's having to work hard to breathe. So off he went, and then, it's like they're on a bed covered in baby poo with no baby, and then all my relatives, I think the relatives had come in just before he'd gone off and had a look at him. And then I got taken to the postnatal ward, and it was getting on evening. And I can remember waking up in the middle of I didn't really sleep much. I remember waking up at one point, the midwife passing me this little picture. I've still got it, of Polaroid picture that they put the wrong date on and crossed out, of this baby that looked like one of the Romanian orphans that was on TV all the time at that point.
Oh,
with this like knitted hat that wasn't properly on. It was a bit sideways.
Oh God.
And just here's a picture of your baby, and like went off, and I'm like, what? Where is the baby?
Where is the baby? Oh my goodness.
So I set off along the corridor to find the baby because I wanted to breastfeed him, which again was pretty unheard of in that part of England, and certainly if you're 18. And found the nursery and found the baby, and knocked on the door, and the midwife who's looking after the nursery was really annoyed that I'd like just rocked up and kind of into her territory.
Dare you come and look at your baby? How dare you come and see your baby? What?
I asked to breastfeed him, and it was like, oh, he's too tired to breastfeed. You have to bottle feed him, and So long story short, I ended up discharging myself from hospital, having still not really sorted out breastfeeding, and just worked it out when I got home.
Brilliant.
So that Rite of Passage was, you learn something about yourself and about the culture, every time you go through a significant rite of passage. And that kind of transformed me into a mother, and it also taught me not to trust other people, which is a message
Yeah.
which is not a good message, but was, if you want to do something, you need to own it yourself and do it yourself and not rely on other people to do it.
100%. And what a great takeaway, like far out. Such a gem. It's so true though. And it's still true. It's still true in our maternity service today. There's so many women who do just that, just what you just shared, who get pregnant. And, it was great that you had the instant thought that I can do this because my mom did this and no problem, I have a baby. I mean, most people actually have the opposite, like, oh shit, how can I do this? And can I do this? And I don't trust my body, or I'm really fearful of birth. So, I mean, that was a great thing that you had that.
Probably because I was 18 and a bit,
Mm.
when you're 18, you can do anything. You know everything.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah. You're invincible. But I mean, that was a great thing to have. But then also it's very common just what you had for for first babies or first mamas having their first baby to just think that, oh, I'll just go into hospital and they'll take care of me and I'll have a baby. And I can't, tell you how many times I tell women to do your research, find out what you want, claim this birth, claim this rite of passage, right? And understand what you're getting yourself into and what you want for your labor and birth, what the options are.
Yeah, and that's about, and it differs depending on your choices around where you're having your baby. But if you're birthing in a facility, then you really need to kind of learn, I call it learn the map, and as a care providers, you should be sharing the map of, in this facility, this is the kind of thing that we normally do. Is that something you'd be wanting to have?
Yeah.
Don't assume that the practices will align with what you want. They might. A lot of the time they do nowadays, in birth center settings, etc. They are pretty much, aligned with evidence-based physiological birth. But if they're not, you need to know that. If you know that in this hospital it's common practice to do X, Y, or Z, and that's something you don't want, then that's something to write in your birth plan.
Yeah.
Then that's why you need to really know about the place you're going to birth in, and the people who are going to be with you.
Or if you want a natural birth but you're booked into a private hospital where the cesarean rate is 70%, maybe it's not the right place for you.
Exactly. How are you going to navigate that? Yeah.
They're really good at doing cesareans, but maybe they're not that good at facilitating natural birth. All right, well, let's dive into your second birth then. Had you then learned something more when you got pregnant the second time?
So it was about 3.5 years between my kids. So I'd done a bit of growing up. I'd had to. But a baby will grow you up. So this next birth I kind of approached, and he said, and like most women, you don't often, so once you've had your baby, you often don't reflect on the birth experience until you're kind of heading into your next rite of passage. You're kind of heading into that next, and then you start to reflect on the lessons you learned and what you need to bring forward into this next rite of passage. So it wasn't really until, so this time I got hold of a Sheila Kitzinger book, Home Birth. It probably would have been secondhand or something, because I had absolutely no money at that point. So my partner then was doing an art degree, and I was working, doing admin and desktop publishing and stuff. So I had a different book. The Miriam Stoppard book was very much a how your body works. Sheila Kitzinger was like another level. It was, that this is a rite of passage. There's more to this than just a baby coming out of your body, that, you're becoming a mother, all that stuff. And really kind of reflected on what it was I wanted from this birth. And I actually just wanted to have a natural birth. I just wanted to not have all that stuff. I just wanted to have a natural birth. And I knew that if I was in a hospital setting and I knew that there was an epidural, if I knocked on a door, that I would ask for an epidural. I knew I would, once I was in that transitional phase. So really, the only way I could not do that was to have the baby at home. And then that would take out all of that external influence on my birth, and it would just be me. So I switched. I kind of went and asked for a home birth. I think I was halfway through the pregnancy, and in the end, on the NHS in the UK, it's free. So That wasn't a huge deal. You know, my midwife went, yep, great. I had a little team of midwives looking after me. And that's what I planned to do. And that's what I did. And I was kind of, as I was saying to you, it was a pretty boring birth, really. It was I'd kind of approached it just going, okay, I know I can do this. Because I did it despite everything last time.
Mm-hmm.
And I just really want to do this at home. And another big thing was I didn't want the baby taken away. I didn't want anybody else taking so that was a big thing for me. And because I'd been told that the reason that he was taking away was because he was mucousy, I talked to my midwives about this and kind of said, oh, when the baby's born, I want the baby to be kind of upside down for a bit so the fluid drains. And the midwives are like looking at me like I'm bonkers because it is actually. And I went, okay. So I had that on my birth plan. Because in my head I didn't want to transfer because I had a mucousy baby, because I hadn't realized that the last time it was because of distress, not mucus. So I'd planned that. I'd also negotiated with the midwives. So in terms of the birth of the placenta, so at home births in the UK, so the good thing about the UK is home birth's free and it's on the NHS. The bad thing about the UK free home birth service is that a lot of the guidelines and practices from the hospital just get brought into the home. So I knew that active management was the standard,
Right.
and particularly at home birth, because
Which
I didn't want
means
to hemorrhage.
giving you an injection when the baby's born to get the placenta out and to manually do the extraction of placenta. Yeah.
So that was an interesting kind of, because I just wanted to do everything naturally. That's but it was interesting because I kind of had to really think about it and think about, okay, so these midwives aren't comfortable with physiological birth of the placenta. I'm not comfortable with active management as standard. And what is it about active management I'm not comfortable about? And it was mostly the giving the injection before the cord. I wanted full perfusion of the baby, which again in those days was a bit odd.
Yeah, super hippie.
Yeah, it was totally hippie. But I wanted the baby to have full blood volume, so I didn't want the cord cutting until it had finished pulsing. I wasn't actually that bothered about the medication at the time. So I negotiated with the midwives because I didn't want them stressing while I was, and I didn't want somebody who didn't really know how to support a physiological birth of the placenta in my space, worrying and interfering with the physiological birth of the placenta. Because, you need those real calm, relaxed environment for that to work. So I negotiated with them and said, you can give me the injection after the cord's finished transferring the blood. So that's what we did. So there's a bit of negotiation. I also had gas and air there, so it wasn't completely natural, but I didn't get around to using it until right at the end and as I had anticipated. So I went into labor. Actually, my waters broke in the early hours of the morning. So this is how it's boring, because it's just like the midwives must have loved me. So I contacted the midwife just before she started her antenatal clinic and said, my waters are broken, I'll probably be having a baby today. And she's like, okay, great, I'll call in on my way to the clinic, see how you're going. So she called in on her way to the clinic, did a vaginal examination, which was probably pointless. I wouldn't personally do that, but anyway. And I said, yeah, well, you're not in labour yet. Let's see what happens. You might have to go into hospital if you don't go into labour within, I think it was 24 hours or something at that point. I was just thinking, yeah, well, we'll work that out when that happens, because I'm not going to go into hospital. And she went off to a clinic and then came back at lunchtime, by which time I was, having good, strong contractions, wandering about the house, and I'd stopped eating cheese. So I was obviously in established labour. In early labour, I was going to the fridge and having a bit of cheese here and there, because I was like really excited that I could eat cheese again soon. And I had cheese in the fridge, had brie in the fridge for afterwards. And I can vividly remember, like, in the kitchen having a massive contraction, leaning on the counter and just going, oh my God, I remember this. Why did I think I could do this at home? You idiot. But then thinking it was now too complicated to change my mind and have the baby in hospital, because it was all set up for home. And then when transition hit, it was exactly the same thing. I was just furious at myself for having put myself in a position where I couldn't get an epidural. So that was my transition, was spent, internally beating myself up about, what an idiot I was. I can't possibly do this without an epidural, while sounding like a cow. We lived in a little flat at the time, so we had to go and explain afterwards to the neighbours.
You sounded like, so the cow you heard was me.
Yes, exactly. I wasn't actually particularly aware of that, and I was getting really annoyed by anybody moving in my field of vision when I had a contraction, so it was like musical statues. I'd have a contraction and it would be like, nobody move until the contraction's finished, otherwise I would kick off and go.
Does feminine spirituality, natural fertility awareness, conscious conception, natural birth and conscious parenting appeal to you? Would you like to be a part of a like-minded community of women who want deeper and more meaningful conversations and relationships in their day-to-day lives? Then the Maiden, Mother and Maga village might be for you. In our village, you will find women exploring healthy, natural and conscious ways of living, relating and being in the world. Women practicing their magic. Mothers preparing for and journeying through her rite of passage into motherhood, navigating pregnancy, sharing birth stories, and the early days of her postpartum transformation. And the Magas, the magical ones, she who has claimed her power and become her magic, trickling down her great wisdom to the younger women in the space. When you join the Maiden, Mother and Maga village, you get access to an uncensored and safe online sisterhood community. You get access to monthly live village sharing circles with women from all over the world and live Mama's Q&As with me. You also get access to monthly video lessons and themes to deepen into feminine embodiment, spirituality, and sovereignty. I hope to see you inside our sisterhood village soon.
So transition was fun, and I think the second midwife, so my primary midwife had arrived at lunchtime, and she was sitting eating a lunch in front of neighbours with my partner, who was my husband by that point. So they're sitting watching neighbours, and I'm wondering about having contractions. I can remember just at one point saying, can you just turn the TV off, because I now needed all the attention on me. It was all about me now. Turn the TV off, this is serious. And then I went into transition and just became that crazy woman that you do in transition, which is all part of the plan. And the second midwife arrived, and then I can remember them trying to take. Now, this is another thing about birth plans. Just be careful what you write and make it generic, because I had written that I wanted to give, thanks to Sheila Kitzinger, that I wanted to give birth squatting.
Right.
And I wanted to guide the baby out myself. That was in my birth plan. This is what I wanted to do, right? Of course, at the time, I didn't give a shit how this baby came out. I just needed it out now.
Yep.
So I was actually on all fours as I started to push the baby out, and had my knickers on. And I can just remember the midwives and my husband trying to get my knickers off, and it was just like, no, because I thought if I kept them on, then the baby wouldn't come out, and I didn't want the baby to come out. So I was wanting the knickers to stay on. So
the rational mind of a birthing woman. Don't you love it? I love it.
Transition's fabulous, because you've got this, like, you've got your limbic system, your instinctive brain's just full on working, because that's where it is in labor. And then you get this surge of adrenaline that switches on your neocortex, but it doesn't properly work because you've still got so you've got this kind of dance between the neocortex, which is thinking part of your brain, and your real instincts, and the two kind of don't connect particularly well. So you often have women just saying insane things, like, I'm going home now, if they're in hospital. It's like, okay, see you later.
Yes, totally. Taking my bags, going, I'm not going to have this baby. I changed my mind.
Yeah. So mine was like, if I just don't take my knickers off, then the baby won't come out. But anyway, they got my knickers off, and they got me into the squat position I'd asked to get in. Me thinking, just what are you doing? Why are you
moving me? I'm perfect on all fours. Stop it.
Just leave me alone. But it was in the birth plan. So then this baby's head comes out. I can remember just looking down. There's this blue head, and she was crying but not making a sound. that should have, you know, warned me about what she'd be like.
Yeah.
So she's this little mouse, and it was a blue head, and the midwife said, "Do you want to touch the baby? Because I put it in my birth plan." And I was just like, "No, just get it out." Oh, get it out. So out she came, and of course they put her head down because I'd put that in my birth. She needs to be upside down. So I'm like looking at this baby's back, just her back, and it was quite hairy. But she was all hairy. The midwife said, "Oh, I think we've found the missing link. Right, so be careful what you say because women remember." But she did actually look like a monkey. So I'm looking at this furry back, and I still don't know what she is. And I'd assumed I was having a boy because I thought I intuitively knew what I was having, because I knew the first time and I was right. So this time I was right. So we had a blue baby grow, and this was going to be a boy. You didn't have any girls' names picked. In those days, you weren't allowed to find out from scan what you were having. So I'm looking at this furry back, assuming I've got another boy. And I must have been minutes and minutes. The midwife said, "Are you going to have a look and see what you've got?" I thought, well, obviously a boy. So I lifted up this thigh, still upside down baby, and saw what was not a vulva. What was not a ball sack. It was obviously missing something. So I put the leg down again, I thought about it, lifted the leg up again, went, oh my God, it's actually a girl. It took me days to get over that it was a girl, because it just didn't fit with my image of what was going to happen. I was going to have two boys. So it was just a massive, like, oh my God. And yeah, so eventually she got turned the right way up and had a breastfeed. But and her brother, who was 3.5 at that point, had been taken out because I didn't want him in the birth space. I knew I'd probably scream, and I didn't want to worry about him. So my mother had taken him to the cafe at the bottom of the street. So this is all happening just, midwife turns up for lunch. This happens before she has to leave, before, I think she's born 3 something in the afternoon, not long after neighbours. And then my son came back, and it's still daytime, and the midwife could pack up and go. So they just spent a few hours there. And I went to bed and had cheese and watched the Tour de France with the baby, and watched the TV. And so this theme of babies being removed actually goes all the way back, kind of through my red thread, my mother line, to my mother's experience of birth with me, because I was removed at birth and she thought I was dead for 8 hours until they brought, until she asked, and then they said, oh yes, of course you can see the baby, and brought me in. And then I did the same thing with my son. So this was, the same theme running through, which is I didn't want to have with my daughter. And when the day that she was born, a baby had been stolen from a hospital. So that was all over the news. The baby was eventually found, but, so we've got this baby just going, that this theme's coming up again. It's not my baby, it's somebody else's baby, and nobody took that baby. So those were my childbirth rites of passage, and yeah, both very different. And I wouldn't say one was a better experience than the other in terms of, every birth experience transforms you, makes you who you are, and they were both equally as valuable in me becoming who I am and teaching me about myself, just in different ways.
Absolutely, totally agree. Amazing. And with your placenta, so did you have then that kind of modified medical kind of active birth of the placenta? Did they give you the injection? And
yeah, they did. So they waited until the cord had stopped pulsing and she'd been turned the right way up. So it was quite a long time in the scale of things. From practice back then would have been to give it immediately on the birth of the baby. And I can't even remember the birth of the placenta, which is fairly common for women, because you're in that enchantment phase, I call it, where you're interacting with the baby and you're oblivious to that. But they would have pulled the placenta out. I just don't really have much memory of any of that. I do remember my son's response to his new sister, which was, he was not very particularly impressed with the baby, but he was very impressed with the placenta, and he can remember looking, oh, it's pretty.
Wow, he thought the placenta was pretty, but not the baby. How interesting. What does he do today? Is he a butcher or something?
No, he's Yeah, but if you know him, you could probably see why he would say.
He likes gory stuff, maybe. So, with the second one, did you keep your placenta? Was that something that you had read about or thought was, nah?
No, you see, in those days, I feel like I'm really old saying that. So Jacob's placenta, he was born in my first baby in hospital. So I remember signing something that allowed them to basically sell my placenta to pharmaceutical companies. So his placenta would have been rubbed on somebody's face, I would imagine.
Oh my God.
And my daughter's placenta would have got packed up with the midwives and taken back to the hospital, which was the standard NHS birth. As you know, they come, they've got their bits and pieces, they clean up, tidy up, take all the stuff back to the hospital afterwards. So no, wasn't on the radar then.
Right. Beautiful. So if you had a first-time mama in front of you right now who's about to have her first baby, and she really wants to have a natural and empowering birth experience, what advice or pearls of wisdoms would you give to her?
Oh, goodness me. Okay, so the book I've just written, I've actually put a chapter in called Preparation. So it's about rites of passage in the first phase, which I've added in because the classic anthropological phases of a rite of passage are separation, liminality, and integration. So I've added on preparation because we can anticipate having a baby, as human women, we know we're growing a baby, we know we're going to have a baby. So there's that kind of preparation for this, for labor and birth and mothering. And, I think it really centers on, and what I call it is cultivating self-trust. So it's about building trust in self, and how that looks to individual women will be completely different. For me, I needed to know exactly how the body works in order to trust it. I have worked with women who just go, I don't want to know anything because that's going to confuse me and make me worry about whether things, I just actually want to not do that preparation. I want to engage in some different preparation. So there's lots of different ways of preparing to have a baby. As they're all over you just go on the internet, there's a million different ways to prepare to have a baby. And it's up to that individual woman about what is it that she needs to do to build trust in herself. And that will, so really to pinpoint that, what is it that I need to build trust in myself? And that's not trust in yourself, not necessarily trust in birth, because birth can throw curveballs, as we know. That's kind of how midwifery evolved, was to be there to catch the curveballs. That it can sometimes, a woman who's having a physiological birth doesn't need anybody there. She just needs love, and anyone can provide that who knows her and loves her. But the role of the midwife really evolved for the times when natural birth becomes pathological. It's kind of, and how to get that back on track or how to manage it. So it's not about trusting birth, but it's about trusting that you have everything you need to birth your baby and to navigate through whatever decisions and however it unfolds, that you have the capacity to walk and take ownership of that and responsibility for it. So I would say that that's kind of my main advice to women is I don't advise any particular course or type of preparation. It's what helps you to cultivate trust in yourself, to own your own rite of passage, because this is about you transforming into mother. It's about your rite of passage. It's not about other people's. It's not about how somebody else chose to do it or how somebody thinks you should do it.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so important for women to first of all see birth as a rite of passage, and to also take responsibility for their own birth. And
I think, and I think also to consider what will be happening around you while you're, because you're going to, animals just birth babies, human women just birth babies, but it's what happens around them that can kind of impact on that. So really to think about where you're going to have your baby, and that's where the whole knowing the map or and having your care provider share the map and being honest with you about the location you're going to birth in. It's not about fear. It's not about, oh, this hospital's really bad. It's like, in this hospital, it's the cultural norm to do these things, because, even in a hospital setting, they can't do something to you without your consent, and there's ways to navigate through and get your wishes met. It's about knowing what the culture is and how you can navigate. So that's what care providers' main job is, I think, in pregnancy. It's about and I call it nurturing self-trust in the woman, reflecting that back to her, asking her how the baby is instead of telling her how she is, asking her what position the baby's in, really placing her at the center. So what you're doing there is kind of really reinforcing her trust in herself rather than her trust in the external expert. Whereas a lot of antenatal care is grooming women to look to the external expert and to look to external knowledge rather than within.
Well, it's not really built to foster, is it? I mean, you go in for a 15-minute checkup, don't you? Most of the time, if you don't have your private kind of independent midwife, or maybe go through a birth center that gives you more time. And they simply just do the pathology, don't they? They, take your bloods, or they check your blood pressure, and they, measure the belly and feel where the baby's lying and listen to the heartbeat, and then maybe ask you how you're going. But you don't really have time to share much, because then you're out the door.
Yep. Which is, so you might have to get that from somewhere else if you haven't got a care provider who's providing that. You might have to ask a doula to come on board, or somebody who's going to actually explore things more deeply. Or you might not need that. I know plenty of women who just go, I don't really need to have a connection with the midwife. I just want them to sort out anything that happens that I can't sort out, and that's fine with me. And also to consider who's going to be in your birth space and what they're bringing. So when I was in private practice, at the 36-week appointment, I'd ask for everybody who was going to be in the birth space to be there, and we'd just have ask the woman, what are your expectations of this person? And ask the person, what do you think your role is? Because often they don't connect. The woman's expecting something that the person, like her partner, is like, whoa, I'm meant to be doing that. Oh my God. So there's an allocation of roles and expectations, and to do that, and to consider who you're bringing in and what their role is and what they're going to bring with them, and why you've asked them. What are they going to, how are they going to help you in your rite of passage during labor and birth? What's their role? And it might just simply be, I think we've thrust men into this very, historically woman-only space. Birth was the collective culture of women until it moved into hospital, and it was disrupted through that to some extent. But it was, the community of women would come together around birth, and the women's friends who would act as gossips, which is where that word gossip comes from, goddessibs, who were there to witness the birth, would do all of the kind of emotional and practical support, looking after her children, caring for her. And the midwife, who would also be from the community, would be invited to kind of oversee, was the term used, oversee the ceremony of childbirth. So she would, tell them what to put in the caudle, which was the drink that the woman would make. But she would not be the one who was doing all of the emotional, physical supporting. She would be the one who would be there to kind of go, this looks like it's going a bit off track. How about we try this? And would bring skills with her to manage variations and complications. That was her role, And in those times of the wise woman, it would have been herbs and practical skills. Now it's medicine. So it's about women really thinking about who's going to be there and what their role is. And if men are going to be there, women with male partners, just consider that this ancestrally has not been a space for men. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't be there. It's an amazing experience for fathers to see their babies born. But what do they need in order to be able to support the woman? Do they need to, and often men like a role, a really clear, your job is, the pool, keep the pool at the right temperature, and permission that if you feel that you're getting anxious about what's happening, you have permission to go, leave the room, not be in that space. That a man who's going to be expected to be the primary emotional supporter for a woman during labor, that's a huge ask. A huge ask actually for anybody who loves a woman, whether they're male or not. But for a man, it can be really outside of their experience as a man, and they can go into protect mode when, you know, the woman doesn't need protecting or fixing. Or so if you're going to have your man there, you know, have a real conversation about what he needs to support him in order to support you. So I guess cultivating self-trust, but also considering who's going to be in your space and what they're bringing. And to look at the postnatal period, which women often forget to look at. You know, what does that look like? How can you create some boundaries around that space for you to integrate with your baby and your new family? And what do you need, you know, physically? Do you want people to be leaving meals for you, setting all of that stuff up? Because that's when you're going to really, you know, need some help and support, is after the baby's born. Birth just happens.
Yes, absolutely. The postpartum is so forgotten, so overlooked, and it's almost bigger than the birth. The first time around, especially. And I don't know about you, but I feel like I've seen that more often than not, that women are very overwhelmed and under-supported in the postnatal space. Obviously, you know, during her pregnancy, she's being seen by the midwives and during the birth, and then she's kind of left to just fend for herself. And in our society, usually just her and her partner. There's not that tribe of women that was, and a lot of women go into total postnatal depletion and exhaustion and overwhelm.
Yep. And what happens to a woman during her rites of passage? The messages that are transmitted to her reflect the culture, and the messages that we transmit to women is that the baby's the most important thing. Never mind you sacrifice yourself for the baby, a whole mother martyr. So in pregnancy, all the focus is on assessing the well-being of the baby. You know, how are you affecting this baby? Is your blood pressure affecting the baby? It's all about the baby. In, you know, during birth, it's all about monitoring the baby, making sure the baby comes out safely, which is important, but you know, the woman gets lost in that. Women have been erased from this significant rite of passage, and you know, are now just reproducers. That the product is more important than the person who produces the product, and the experts in the experts in the product are the people who remove the product from the body, which are the, you know, care providers. That's often the messages that are being transmitted. And then in the postpartum period, so in my book I actually write about. So each section, I write about rites of passage from the past and what used to be happening, and then what's happening now and why that's happening, and whether it's evidence-based. So in the integration phase, which is the postnatal phase, it's interesting because if you look historically and globally, there is very commonly a period of exclusion from society. So you go into the separation phase in early labor, where you separate from your usual kind of interactions with other people and space. You go through this liminal phase where you kind of this between and betwixt state of mental state as well, because you know you often have that altered state of consciousness, and then you birth this baby and you're now into this integration phase, which is all about mother and baby integrating as one, and integrating back into society as a mother with a baby, and the baby integrating into society for the first time. And there was really like kind of stringent rituals around that historically, and often women would be you know, in a not stay in the birth environment for 30 days or more. So for example, in Europe, it would be the lying in chamber, and you'd have these really kind of strict rituals and ceremonies around, you know, you'd have the lying in chamber, then you'd have these phases that the woman would go through. One was called the up-sitting, where the gossips would arrive and help the woman sit up and with the baby and clean the bed, and then she'd be able to get up and sit and walk around the room but not leave the room. And so there's all this kind of very slow integration of mother back into her normal state, which protected the mother and the baby because they were resting. They didn't have people coming in and picking the baby up. The babies were often considered to be, in different cultures, in a kind of real in-between state and really vulnerable to spirits, etc. So they would be protected from any external, you know, people or spirits or anything else coming into that space. And there was often this real rituals that would be about abdominal massage and helping the basically making the woman feel relaxed, and oxytocin flow and helping her uterus contract down. So there was all this really intricate rituals that would be ongoing for, usually 30 days after the birth of the baby. Whereas in our modern birth culture, the integration rites of passage, so the rituals that are enacted, are all around rushing the birth of the placenta, rushing the transition of the baby initially after birth, breathe, 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 rushing the birth of the placenta, then, very quickly processing a woman through from birth suite to the postnatal ward to home. That's it. Now you're back out there within, now it's a couple of days. And then that's it. Off you go.
It's like a factory. Yeah.
There's no honoring of that huge transition during the integration of mother of this baby, and just your body trying to get back to how it was, never gets back to how it was. Your body transforming and recovering from the birth process, the baby recovering from the birth process, and now having to get used to being in this external world with different smells and sounds, and there's no honoring of that. We're just kind of straight into it.
Yeah, totally agree. It's really been lost, but it's starting to be reclaimed now. Women are starting to remember. I mean, generally, women are starting to remember ceremony, ritual, and traditional ways of women being together in circles and sharing and supporting, and the tribe and women coming together. So all this old knowledge is kind of having a rebirth right now, I feel, through the modern woman remembering.
Yes. Yeah.
Probably because it's gone so far in a very opposite direction of nourishing and loving the feminine and the woman and the life creatress that she is. So yeah, I really, really agree. To me, the postnatal period is so important to prepare for, and to know about these ceremonies that are still practiced around the world. I mean, this is back in the day in Europe, but it still happens around the world in still traditional cultures, and so we can learn from them as well.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Rachael, for coming on my podcast and sharing your beautiful wisdom. And I know you have this new book out. Do you want to share with us what it's called and where we can find it?
Oh, okay. So it's Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage, weaving ancient wisdom with modern knowledge. And it's basically it's a reclaiming of knowledge, but within a modern context. So it's really looking at science, history, culture, anthropology, and weaving it through, and all that evidence-based stuff that I love, because I just think we need to change the framework that we have at the moment for understanding birth is the stages of labor, which is bullshit. There are no stages of labor, and it's so focused on just the cervix opening, which is like one small piece of the, and it's all dependent on somebody putting fingers in you to know wait. It's all wrong. So this is I did this for my PhD in 2013, and then since I've kind of used it for a framework for teaching about birth physiology and the emotional needs of the woman, as well as the physiology. But putting that framework on allows you to look at not just what's happening hormonally and how that is working and the physiology, that kind of science bit, but also allows you to look at that transformative, emotional, spiritual, soul-based transformation that is also happening, and the whole social and cultural influences on that. It's a framework that allows you to really kind of unpick birth and unravel it and then reclaim it, and really looking at how what we do has changed, what the evidence is around the things that we now do, like active management of the birth of the placenta, the injection of the placenta. Talk about what is the evidence for that? Why did that come about? What's the evidence for it? What used to happen, and when you can see where things started and how they came about, it allows you to really see other ways of doing things and understand. I teach student midwives, and it's always the why. So which is why we start the course. The first course is about history and the collective culture of women, and going way back to early humans. How did early humans birth? And the first chapter in my book is her story, and it goes right from early humans through to, the Middle Ages, through to the modern, and it's really a very short space of time that we've had a modern birth culture like we have now. It's really, it's what, 70s that and kind of the evidence-based practice only came out in the 90s, but really it's kind of 60s, 70s where all birth was pretty much happening in hospitals. So we've got this real small part of history that's heavily influencing what we're doing. And even though we've got research evidence saying, well, that's possibly not the best thing to be doing, we're in a situation where we're trying to prove with research evidence that it's all right to not do the things that were brought in before evidence-based practice ever came about,
Yes.
So cord cutting's a classic one. They just decided, let's cut the cord really early for a range of reasons without any evidence about it. In fact, evidence against it. And then, but because there's no research evidence, so we're now trying to get research evidence to show that it's all right to not cut the cord. But they never showed that it was all right to do it. So that's kind of where we're at. So so the book is the real exploration of birth culture, but also birth practices.
Love it. I can't wait to read it. So where can I buy it?
Oh, it will be in all the usual places. I don't know when this podcast will go out. It's at the proofreading point now, so it depends how quickly things like Amazon get on board once it's released. I will be, if people follow me on Midwife Thinking, I will be keeping everybody updated with once it's out there in the world. It's the baby's head is on view, but I need to push the baby out. It kind of needs to.
Right. Brilliant.
We're through the transition phase, but and it's there. I just need to get it into Amazon and all the places, but it will be available wherever you can buy books. Awesome. And from my website.
Exciting. I can't wait for it to be available so I can read. I'm sure I'll find it so interesting and full of wisdom for sure. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
It's been a pleasure having you. Thank you for listening. If you love this podcast, then please consider sharing it, leave a review, or make a contribution on our Patreon page. And if you want to connect on social media, then find the podcast on Instagram as The Natural Birth Podcast. Thank you for listening.